It's that time again. The annual conference of the American Society of Ag Consultants, otherwise known as ASAC, is going to be held in Fort Myers, Florida, this November 4th and 5th. Kurt Covington is one of 9 professionals who will address the conference. The other speakers who will cover a wide range of topics represent Florida Farm Bureau, Florida Citrus Commission, University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture, National Ag Law Center, Risk Mitigators and Advisors, Tyler Associates, as well as the lead economist for dairy at CoBank, and myself, Chrissy Wozniak from North American Ag. The day and a half of presentations will be followed by ag tours on Tuesday afternoon at Echo Farms, one of my favorite places here in Fort Myers. Attendees will experience farming at its most creative, with unique demonstrations, plants, and techniques being used to help farmers and urban gardeners in developing countries. A second tour at Echo will showcase simple technologies that can improve food, water, and shelter for millions of people. A third tour of a hydroponic grower is also being planned. For more information and to register, visit www.agconsultants.org. That's www.agconsultants.org. See you there.
Welcome to the Rural Sales Show with my dad and host St. John Craner. Each week, my dad interviews people who you can learn from, like sales and marketing experts, authors, and performance coaches to help you and your rural sales team get to the next level. Oh, and make sure you subscribe or rate us on iTunes so you can buy me a motorbike. And now here's my dad.
This week we have a lovely lady by the name of Chrissy Wozniak. Chrissy is a podcaster, content producer, and rural marketer over in Cape Coral in Florida. Chrissy and her podcast, she's in the 0.5, that's the top of the top world podcasts as determined by Apple and Stitcher and Spotify. So we were incredibly lucky to get her on the show to talk about all things rural marketing. Relevantly, we talk about trade shows, as the Yanks call them, or field days as we might call them down here in the Southern Hemisphere, and the do's and don'ts, the patterns, the mistakes, how you can make the most of your trade show. We talk about lead generation, marketing automation, some of the tools and technology you can use to reduce wastage in your rural marketing. We talk about what makes a rural good marketer, why most rural marketing doesn't work. There's a shit ton of good stuff in this podcast. We went just over an hour, so if you're listening to it at about 1.5 speed in the truck, it will take you a little bit longer. There's gold littered throughout this podcast. Chrissy is, there's a reason why she's in the 0.5 top 0.5%. That's within the 1% top of world podcasts. And she runs an agricultural podcast, and she's still in the top 1%. So when I say she's worth listening to, I mean it. So I enjoyed this one. As always, listen, learn. Take notes if you can, and I hope this one is as useful as I found it as well. Well, hey team, we're back for another week on the Rural Sales Show. We are very, very lucky to have a lovely lady by the name of Chrissy Wozniak. Chrissy indulged me, put up with me, tolerated me, was very patient. I was on her show, the North American Ag Podcast, where she highlights everything brilliant and positive about ag. Chrissy's based in Cape Coral in Florida. She's a day behind us in NZ. And Chrissy, lovely to have you on the show. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for being on my show too. I'm really excited to be answering questions instead of always asking them.
Awesome. Great. Isn't it weird, when because you've done podcasts way longer than me, where you're interviewing someone and then they start asking you questions as a host. I actually really enjoy that.
Yeah, me too, actually. There are a few, especially when I interview podcasters. They'll always ask questions back, and I think that's fun.
Yeah.
But you kind of get put off like, oh, wow, I have to answer a question. Yeah.
Curiosity is great, isn't it? I think people give themselves away, not necessarily by their answers, but the questions they ask. And that's why I always say the question is the answer, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. Chrissy, so why don't you tell everyone what you're about and what you do, and then we can roll into talking a lot about rural marketing, automation, trade shows, field days, all the stuff that I'm really excited to cover with you.
That sounds great. Well, I am originally Canadian from Ontario, Canada. I moved down to Florida almost 2 years ago now. And I grew up wanting to be a farmer. And my uncle had a farm and I fell in love with it. And that's what I always wanted to be. I went to school for agriculture. And then I realized that there were only two ways to become a farmer. And one was to have a lot of money. And the other one was to marry a farmer. And I didn't have either of those. So I got into agribusiness. And so I've worked in agribusiness my whole adult life. And other than I owned a landscaping company as well, but I was growing things too. So I still count that as well. But I worked in the corporate world up until 2017 when I decided to start my own consulting company in sales and marketing. And I'm very passionate about sales and marketing process and really automation, customer journeys, things like that. So from 2017 to 2020, I really focused there. And then in 2020, when the world closed down, I couldn't travel anymore. I used to travel for work 40 to 50% of the time in Canada and the US. And all of a sudden I was grounded. So I wasn't really sure what was going to happen with my business. So I read a book called How to Sell in Tough Times. And what it said was take your current network and serve them. It's that easy. So I called up my network, a bunch of people in my network, and that network was really agriculture manufacturers, seed suppliers, fertilizer suppliers. I'd been on the road and doing farm shows for like 27 farm shows a year. So that was my network, is those people. So I called them up and I said, what can I do for you? And, I kept calling and nobody really knew what I could do, but I'm in marketing. And I had been beating them over the head for years. Like, you guys got to get with the times here. And then all of a sudden we arrived and now they were really far behind. So I had one of my friends say to me, you know what we really need? You know, the 10 questions you get asked at a trade show over and over and over again, and you get so tired of answering those 10 questions. We need somebody to ask those questions because now we're at home and we can't answer them. So I said, well, that's easy. I can do that. So that's how my podcast started, is just trying to serve the people that have been so good to me my whole career and trying to do something for them. It started out just as a 3-day event and we just held it on YouTube. And then afterwards they asked me, when's the next one? And I'm like, oh my goodness, that was a lot of work. So then that's when I decided to start the podcast. So now I'm 3 years into the podcast, and I learned just a couple days ago according to Listen Notes, we're in the top 0.5% of podcasts worldwide, which is astounding for something I didn't really mean to do.
Yeah, so good, Chrissy. Let's just take a moment to celebrate that. That's so well done. So you're in the 0.5% of podcasts in the world, in ag or overall?
Overall.
Chrissy, that's
and you can go to listennotes.com and it'll show you everybody's podcast and where they rank. And a year and a half ago, I was in the top 4%. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So I couldn't even believe it when I checked last week and saw that it was in the top 0.5%.
I'm so chuffed for you.
Insane.
I know, because you've been very deliberate and you've been very disciplined. And I'm trying to do the same myself. I'm earlier on in that journey. So well done. It's a real hat tip to you, Chrissy. Well done. Because, podcasts are a labor of love, right? We're all busy. We're all trying to earn money, serve our clients. And, certainly my podcast isn't monetized currently. And I do it just because I want to help people, and selfishly, I learned so much. Even if it was just me listening to this, talking to people like you and the guests and the caliber of guests that we've had on, sharing their knowledge. So that's awesome. It's so good. So good.
Yeah. And that's a really good point too, that it, you start out wanting to serve people but you learn so much from the people on your show. It's actually evolved the podcast. It started out just wanting to help companies. Now it's really made me more aware of the issues in agriculture in North America. And I try to cover that at least once a month. Yeah. So it's true. Yeah. It's a conversation. It's not just, trying to push out content. It is really to try to serve.
Good. And we're getting into conversation and pushing out content. So you're on the road across Canada and the US about 40, 50% of the time of the working week. And you were doing 27 trade shows a year. That's pretty full on. And then obviously COVID came and all these rural marketers and seed for agricultural equipment, machinery went, oh no, like we can't go to trade shows anymore. And the tap turned off, right? And everyone literally around the world was grounded. So what did you learn? Let's get into it, because we just had National Field Days here a couple of weeks ago in New Zealand. It's a really big event, and they're back in the normal calendar in June, which is the right time for them to be having it. What have you learned? What have you learned, and what have your clients learned around trade shows and optimizing them, maximizing them, making the most of them as what I would call one leg of the marketing stool? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I guess pre-COVID, we all prided ourselves on our handshake industry, right? I'm sure you felt the same way. We have an industry based on loyalty and trust and hard work, and everybody's proud of that. And all of a sudden, that personal touch was gone. But I think that it was overdue, because there were tools that we could use that nobody was using in the industry. And it was, if you want to keep up, you have to use the tools. But because it was kind of easy, everybody stayed and did the same thing for so long. And now I'm sure it's the same there, but in North America, there's fewer farmers. They don't all go to farm shows anymore. There's fewer farmers, but bigger farms. So, the companies that could land a farm and sell everything and have that brand loyalty, that was great for them. But for especially the small manufacturers, how are they supposed to break in? Right. And that's where technology comes in. And I think it was kind of the kick that these manufacturers needed to try to get into that space. And I guess it was necessary for sure. And they, what was the second part of your question again?
Around what you've seen, what they've learned,
at
what
shows.
you've learned. Yeah,
right.
at trade shows.
Yeah,
we call them field days, you call them trade shows, or, literally where they've got a stand and they've dropped a ton of cash, and then all the iceberg under the water costs of travel and fuel and accommodation and food and beers, and, it stacks up. It's got to work, right?
Yes, for sure. And so so we actually did a roundtable about the future of farm shows back in fall of 2021, I believe. And I brought together experts from manufacturers to trade show leaders, and it was very interesting. I was very curious as to how this was going to evolve. This was just as things started to open up again. And I guess what came out of it is that a company needs to keep that personal touch somehow, but use technology and evolve. I think the days of these big shows that are union run, that are you're just cattle being put in and out, and they're so expensive. A company spends $100,000 just to be there for 4 days. And is it really worth it? I think those days are really dwindling and are almost over. And now they have to be more creative. In that roundtable that we had a person come on from Horde's Dairymen. And what they do, they've started a new type of show where they actually invite farmers to a week of vacation. And then they can schedule appointments with companies if they're thinking about moving forward with some projects. So that was really interesting. I think that people are going to have to start thinking outside of the box when it comes to these shows, because sitting in a chair at a table, just saying hi to people is, I don't know if that's ever going to come back again. And if you do go, like, I still love shows. I love meeting, I love being with my people again. Right. Yeah. I traveled. We called ourselves carnies, or I called them carnies. I think I named us that, where we just travel around from place to place and we're together and we made kind of a family. Right. And so I miss that. And so I'm happy to be back to it again, but we have to be smarter. Right. So if a company wants to go to a show or field days, as you say, you have to have a strategy. You can't just plunk your people down. They're going to sit there and play on their phones. The last show I was at, my kids go to trade shows with me too sometimes. And, I want them to have good work ethic. And I'll text them pictures, like 6 pictures in a row of people sitting in their booth, just playing on their phones. Like, this is ridiculous and it's unacceptable. And why are you paying $100,000 for your person in your booth to just sit there on their phones? So that you have to have structure and you have to have strategy when you're sending your people out. And, the technology can help. Like, what I usually recommend is make sure you have geo-targeted ads around that show so that when they're checking Facebook, they're checking Twitter, that's going to pop up on their phone and say, come visit booth, whatever number, and then reward them when they come to your booth, whether it's candy, whether it's a hat, whether it's a pen, whatever it is, reward them when they come to the booth, and then try to get their email address, right? That the cookie is a thing that you need to embrace, right? In marketing. So that's an excellent way to do it at a field day.
I just wanted to jump in there, Chrissy, and agree with everything you've said. Not because I just do that to be kind, but I see when I walk around field days, or at Southern field days here in the South Island, or Central District field days in the Lower North Island, or Dargaville up in Northland, or Mystery Creek in field days, national field days in Hamilton, like it was a couple of weeks ago, a lot of these reps don't look like they want to be there. And their highlight of their day is who's getting coffee at 9:30.
Yep.
Who's having sausage, who's getting lunch, and where we having dinner, and what beers are we going to have. And
absolutely, I
know this is a huge generalization, but those companies haven't sold their sales teams on trade shows, and they haven't sold them on the show, so to speak. And that, without being kind of woo-woo, that energy vibration where you see them literally kicking stones and hoping that someone's going to pick them amongst the vast 600, 700,000 exhibitors or whatever there are there. And you'll have some massive ones in the States and Canada, right, that will make ours look ridiculously small. You just think, surely there's a better way of optimizing or integrating that component of your marketing in the bigger scheme. I mean, your geo-target ads is a great example of a before strategy, right? And then giving the reward, and then making sure you've got something to give them where you can capture leads and nurture leads. So, I mean, you seeing trade shows in the States and Canada, because obviously you were very good at this. Like, what did you pick up from the future farm shows that with that panel of experts? What were the main themes coming out of it? Where's it going? What's happening?
Yeah, I think that the shows themselves need to reorganize and provide better value. I think that's their responsibility if they want to keep going. They're going to have to provide better value. They have to embrace the digital world. I think a lot of the shows here aren't adding things like, we'll take a picture of your booth and promote it, or, we'll do a company highlight and promote it online. So one of the biggest shows, the Louisville show, World Dairy Expo, there's up to, 600, 800 booths. How is a person going to notice all 800 of those people? Right. So I think these shows have to get a little bit more creative in how they're promoting the people that are paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars to be there. So that's number one. Number two, as you said, the employees you're sending need to be engaged and need to understand why they're there, what their purpose is. And I've seen it go the other way too. You have the person that's just sitting there on their phone, but then you have the other person who's standing out in the middle and scaring people away because they're trying to sell too hard. Yeah. And that just scares people away too. So I think before you send somebody to a trade show, they need some training on how to be graceful, how to not be annoying, and not to be on their phone, and not to eat in the booth. Right. Those are the rules. You have to, have eye contact, basic things we used to be taught in kindergarten, right? Just to be polite and be, a respectful human being. And we shouldn't have to teach that now, but unfortunately we do. And I think the digital world has created that. The digital world has given us great things, but it's also made us a little bit more like hermits, right?
Yeah, we can kind of slack off. And I think what you're talking about there, it's not just old school or old fashioned. It's just being a professional, right? Being planned and prepared, understanding your purpose, being engaged, making sure you're well fed and hydrated. Because it is an endurance event, attending those events. I know what it's like. I see some of the guys that I saw a couple of weeks ago, they were knackered. They did the setup and they're doing the pack down. So they're doing another day either side. I wanted to ask you, Chrissy, because you're, very, very qualified in this, is often I talk to some of the exhibitors and some of them I know, and they go, well, if we weren't here, they feel FOMO and scarcity. And I think the point you made around the field day or the trade show organizers, and I think field days here, they're definitely embracing digital a lot better than they used to, and they're doing a good job. And obviously, like any business, you can always improve. But having a duty of care is what you talked about, not just taking the money and putting up the site fee. Because this is the when you hear about sponsorships and they go, oh, can you just make my logo bigger? That I run to the hill when I hear that phrase as an ex-sponsorship manager on the client side. I know that we failed to deliver commercial value. It was an exchange of logos. It was not an exchange of commercial value. The same thing I hear, a cry for help I hear from field days attendees that probably need some help or don't know quite what they're doing, is they go, we're in a different site this year. It's just they changed our booth site. We were there and now here, and it's completely affected things. Do you hear those sort of those telltale signs where we're not taking responsibility for optimizing and maximizing that investment, which is often a big investment?
Oh, absolutely.
What do you hear? What are the excuses you hear of non-performance at field days or a trade show?
Yeah, well, number one is what you said first, is that FOMO, right? Like, if we're not here, they're going to think we're out of business. Well, you're better off to not be there if you're going to just sit there with an empty booth or sit there with a scowl on your face, right? You're actually you're doing damage to your brand if you're going to send somebody to just sit there playing on their phone or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So I think I hear that a lot. Oh, well, it's got to change. But this was even pre-pandemic, was, farm shows are dying. Well, when we didn't have them, you missed them. So that was an excuse, right? Yeah. So I've said that to a lot of people since then. Like, you told me you missed them, but before that you said they were dying. Well, what's changed? Well, we realized that we need them. Okay, well, then what are you doing different? How are you engaging? How are you following up? How are you, how is your pipeline, right? What are you doing with these leads? What's your process in all of this? I guess they,
what do you hear them say? What do you hear them say when they are blaming their lack of ownership or accountability for their part in maximizing the trade show? Because what I hear is sometimes, if we weren't here, we sold 27 units. Now, the thing I want to talk about as a marketer is, having done marketing half my career, let's talk about attribution. Did they come to the field day as a result of your advertising or your referral or your on-farm field day or your demo day? And it just happens to be that they actually, or did they come with a list at field days expecting at the trade show coming with a really, really hot price? So that question of attribution is what's been your experience on attribution and attributing that deal to the fact that it was done at a trade show?
Yeah, that's really exciting. I love talking about that. Good. Because that's like the conundrum of a marketer, and especially a marketer from 10 years ago and before that, right? You have to have a plan for attribution today. And then you have to make sure that very first time that lead is interacts with your company, that's marked down somewhere. And technology can do that. It's very simple. You just have to plan ahead. It's not random. You don't just go and, shake hands and hope somebody comes and buys from you. You have to, that attribution is so important. And what I think is a good solution, in my opinion, is the use of QR codes at shows, right? So if you have QR codes on your posters, if you have it on your business card, if you have it on a contest sign, if you have it on your brochures, as soon as they scan that QR code, there's a cookie on that device, and now you know who they are. So as long as you have a good CRM or good marketing automation that can keep track of that QR code, now you've locked them in. So what I do, depending on which show I'm at or who the audience is, I'll do a giveaway or a contest. And you come here and it's in exchange for an email address. And all they have to do is scan the QR on my sign. I can have 50 people lined up at my booth, have them all scanning. You know how in the days where we used to have like your iPad and they'd have to go sit there and type it on your iPad.
Or worse, they had to fill in a form with the name address.
Those were the worst. And then you'd have like a bag with 5,000 email addresses that sat on the shelf for 3 years.
Yeah.
I remember those days. That was terrible.
And then the data entry, that email's null and void, or we don't know how to spell St. John's name or whatever. Yeah. 100.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So luckily we don't live there anymore. I probably still have the bags of names, right? Still sitting there somewhere. Yeah. But now it's so easy. They scan it with their phone. It autofills their email address. And then, but I guess I've had companies come to me and say, yeah, we have QR codes all over our booth. Nobody scans them. Well, it's a trade. It's currency. What is that email address worth to you? You have to put a dollar value on that email address. Once you do that, you can find something worth that dollar amount to trade them. 100%. Right? I'll give my email address if somebody gives me a cookie, right? Yeah. Or a slice of pizza, or you know what I mean? Like, what is that worth to you? If a lead is worth $100, right? Say if you sold fancy cars, if that's worth $100, you give them something worth $100.
Absolutely. This is what we talk about myopic marketing, right? And I think it was either Drucker or one of the gurus, right? And the one of the biggest mistakes I see marketers make, whether it's in trade shows and rural marketing per se, is that they don't understand the lifetime value of the customer. So therefore they underinvest in the cost per acquisition. So your lifetime value of that customer determines the cost per acquisition. In your case, in that micro case, is, okay, so how much is a lead worth to you? Now, you could spend, if they're going to be spending $180,000 on a 6 Series secondhand tractor, they're worth a lot of money to you, and you're making anything from, you're not very good, 6% up to 12% on that. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
By my maths, that's $7,000-8,000 of margin. Then the parts and service, aftermarket, all those things. You want to be giving them something pretty decent for that contact. So the attribution part is really, really important. And what you're saying is, do not underinvest in the reward or the incentive to get that email. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And for a product, it's pretty simple, I would say, to do that calculation. If I'm selling shirts, my email address is probably worth 25 cents, right? Yeah. If I'm selling a combine, it's worth $500. Yeah. So, they're in that case, you're not going to give everybody the $500. So you have to have kind of a funnel, even just for lead generation. But it's all strategy, and it all has to be worked out well before the event, right? Yeah. So, and that's in-person event. Online, it's the same thing. It's just you're going to have more impressions. So, for example, for my company, my product is content, right? So if I want an email address, what kind of content am I going to give that person in exchange for that email address?
Correct.
But if it was a product, what is that? But it's always that exchange that you have to think about.
Yeah, beautiful. The other thing around, just quickly back to trade shows before we pivot to lead generation automation and using marketing technology and MarTech stacks to do the heavy lifting for, we're going to talk about predictable and reliable lead generation, and you use that very important word process, and we'll get to that. But before we do that, I just want to say COVID forced all our rural businesses around the world to have a forced split control test, an A/B test. So 1 year they had a trade show, the next year they didn't. And then they decided, okay, we're going to try some other technologies here. And the other thing that I hear from people is, farmers aren't on Facebook, St. John. Well, a third of the world's popular. Guys, you haven't seen the visual, but Chrissy's just like, and she's a very polite, well-mannered lady. She's just like giving me the eye roll. Farmers aren't on Facebook. So go on, give me the answer, because I want to pick up on that. What I obviously triggered you there.
Yeah,
farmers aren't on Facebook, Chrissy. We're not doing social media. It doesn't beat face-to-face, and we can justify it by awareness and visibility and presence. Come on.
I would have agreed with you 100% 3 years ago. I thought I had to sit with a person and eat with a person to build a relationship. Now I just hired somebody I've never met but have worked with for 4 years. Right? So it is possible. And yes, farmers are on Facebook. Everybody is on Facebook. Right? And you have to embrace it. There's I guess the thing that bothers me now is that because the social media channels are now pay to play, it's a lot more expensive than it used to be. It used to be a lot easier to gain followers and get traction. It just means that you have to budget better. You have to have an actual marketing budget. You have to plan your dollars. You have to, research and get insight from other people to see where that spend should go, where that would be the most. I don't know about there, but in North America, Twitter, farmers love Twitter. And, producers talk constantly. It's a constant, ongoing conversation about what's being planted, what's being harvested, what's going on with equipment repairs. And I think it's beautiful. So any company, any manufacturer, you're going to get left behind if you don't embrace it now.
We have one Facebook group here called New Zealand Farming, and it has 120,000 people on it, which is, probably small snacks for you guys. But that's a big, big group, and the specificity and the granularity of what they talk about. So if you're a business and you're listening to those groups and the questions they're asking and the words they're asking, it's utter gold for your marketing messages. So I don't want to divert because I know you would agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
So let's talk about when you're not doing trade shows and field days and you haven't invested all your money in one finance company, as my analogy is, let's just put all our money on black 39 and hope, because hope isn't a strategy, right? So let's be a sensible, responsible rural business or marketing and diversify and the risk by putting some in digital, some in trade shows, some on local events, community sponsorships, et cetera, et cetera. Talk to me about lead generation and lead magnets for anyone that doesn't understand that concept. And, let's talk about predictable, reliable lead generation and what benefits that gives a rural business.
Yeah, so I always start with, people say, how much should I spend? Right. And that always seems to be the first question. And so that's where I usually start is don't just pick a dollar value, right? Don't just say, well, I'm going to throw this against the wall and see if it works. I'm going to throw this, this ad company called me and they want $5,000. So no, I say base it on your revenue. If you want to grow, spend 12% of revenue. If you want to stay the same, spend 5% of revenue. If you want to go out of business, don't spend anything, right? And then when you decide where on that spectrum between 5 and 12% that you can afford, you need to do a few things. You need to decide where you want to show up, but you also need to hone in on not just where you should be, but how your entire process flows. So from marketing to customer satisfaction, getting the product out the door, I always say start with that. Document that entire system, because odds are you're wasting money. You're wasting money with people doing the same thing over and over and over again. You can automate that. You can automate so much. You can create a process for the people who work for you so that they don't have to sit and remember, how do I do that again? What if they want this product? What do I have to do? You can automate all of that. And so if somebody says, well, I can't afford 12%, but I still want market share. Well, then let's do a time study on from beginning to end. Let's see where we can cut some of your costs, because I'm pretty sure you're paying somebody to play Candy Crush, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So let's try to get rid of that. You're paying somebody to sit there and think, how do I do that again? When you could have a button in your CRM that sends them a notification with the instructions. If it's something, there's always those things where you don't do it every day. So it's hard to remember how to do it, but you can automate all of that stuff. So I'd say, figure out your budget, try to cut your waste, and then figure out, okay, where I'm going to spend, I have a resource on my website that takes you through this process. It's just an Excel sheet that I came up with, and you put in your revenue and it kind of divvies it all up for you. And then you can make a decision as to, okay, well, we'll do, we'll spend this much on a trade show. We'll spend this, but you should start with that total for the year, or else it's just like your own family budget, right? If you're not budgeting for your life, well, I'm going to take a cruise. It's going to cost $25,000. Oh no, I can't pay the mortgage in December, right? Like, you have to, we wouldn't do that for our family. Why would we do that for our company? You need to have a plan, and then you need to put the plan in stone, automate as much as possible, but then you have to collect the data at the end, and you need that data coming in real time so that you can steer your ship and make the right decisions. So for me, I call it process focused marketing. And that's what I've used for years. And I think that's the mind frame or the mindset that you need to get into to build that framework, to figure out your message, project your voice, but then also measure the results, and measure the results often. But don't buy into the data overload thing either, because that is time consuming, just checking. I find myself doing it too, right? Like how many downloads, how many this, how many impressions. If you do it, set a schedule and say, I'm going to check all of these things once a month, right? And I'm going to take 5 KPIs, right? 5 indicators where I know I'm doing well, and I'm just going to check those ones. I don't need all that data. I'm not going to just waste time with spreadsheets. I'm going to take these 5 things that mean a lot, and then I'm going to look at those, and then I'm going to change something else and tweak and tweak and tweak. And this isn't a once a year thing. This is a once a week, once a month thing. But again, plan the strategy before you start, right?
Yeah, so important. I love the point you made around process focused marketing, because the point you made is really interesting, because people often ask me as well, okay, so what should I be spending as a percentage? I usually say around 6% to 8%. So you guys doing more, that's great. But it's really interesting to hear where you're coming from on that. But regardless of the spend you want it to be effective, because the first thing that gets cut out in a recession or hard economic times, or in a sales slump, is marketing.
Absolutely.
Because most rural marketing is highly ineffective, right? So why is it that, we're talking about wastage here. So the process, you're saying you can identify tech tools and automation that can reduce, because sometimes we're really getting to a good one here, Chrissy. I've been looking forward to this conversation for weeks, and getting your view on things. Is there's so much wastage in marketing that I see, wastage in the personnel. And interestingly, so when you and I turn up, or our peers, and we talk about auditing the process and identifying wastage and optimizing and using automation, are you met sort of rather defensively by marketing people, because they go, oh, well, Chrissy's going to come in and, my marketing coordinator, my marketing exec, my marketing manager, my brand, we're not going to have a job by the time this lady's been through here. How do you how are you embraced?
Oh gosh, this is hilarious, because especially salespeople hate the CRM.
Yeah.
But the CRM can build an environment to help them sell. The problem is managers use reporting as a way to justify their own job. So they make it miserable for the salespeople. So the people who I get the most resistance from are the marketers and the salespeople who I can actually help. The person who wants me there is the sales manager who I can automate their job out of existence. It's the oddest thing to me.
Yeah.
The manager today is pretty redundant. Any software can replace a manager now.
Yeah.
So the person who wants me there is the person that I can replace. The person who's terrified of me is the person I can help. And it's always really hard to get through to these people. Like, I want an environment for you to succeed. I've been a salesperson and I've been a sales manager. I know both of those, right? I've had terrible sales managers and I've had amazing sales managers. So yeah. So are you noticing the same thing?
Oh, here we go. This is where the guests start asking the host questions. Look, we're only 36 minutes into people, and she's already asked me, no, look, Chrissy, I love it. I had Wesleyan Greer on a few episodes ago, and she specializes in sales manager training. And she's saying a lot of what you were saying is that when you look at the sales and marketing tech tools and the AI that's out there that can literally record a sales conversation, automatically at the press a button at lightning speed, work out the question to answer ratio, tone, manner, duration, were they following the cadence, where did their line of questioning go? This technology already exists. Like, I agree, like some managers manage behind a desk. Now, there are good managers. I think some of the best managers should take their own advice that they give their reps is get out there and spend time in the truck observing rather than observing through a spreadsheet or a CRM. Now, I'm just going to quickly whip back to attribution on trade shows and go, why am I doing that? Is if you are using a CRM correctly, as you say, you get attribution. And so it is. It creates the environment, a supportive environment. But I find the same is I find not all, but some rural marketers are very insecure, defensive bunch, because when people like you and I come poking and prodding around and talking to their big bosses or the VPs or the CEOs, the MDs, the owners, and going, we can strip out a lot of wastage. I think we can identify about 30% of wastage here, and some of it might be labor and some of it might be wage bill. You know, when you go through that process and that time study where you spit out a number and go, actually, hey, you know, we can actually do some automation here to do it. We're received very cynically by those that are affected. And that's an interesting dynamic because, you know, we're challenging their very status, significance, and survival. And if you do that psychologic for a human main motivation, you ain't going to get very far. No,
for sure. And I think, you know, the salespeople and the marketers that are learning and are open are less like that. So I'm not talking about them, but if they could just understand that a salesperson should be having meaningful conversations with leads, right? So anything we can do to give them more time having meaningful conversations with leads, that should be always the goal. For a marketer, they should have their desk cleared so they can be creating content and measuring the success of it. And that's what their goal should be. So any of the other junk, if we can clear that away, if we can automate all that other stuff, and it's totally possible, but with bad attitudes or with people that don't want to grow, people that don't want to succeed, it makes it very difficult. So in that case, a manager would have to see and recognize what's happening and say, okay, well, maybe this isn't a good fit then.
Yeah, 100%. So tell me, Chrissy, why, in your view, in your experienced view, why does most rural marketing not work? And why is it always having a line put through it or, you know, budgets being cut because times are getting hard?
I would say that it's because they're throwing noodles at the wall, right? I think there's just not enough emphasis put on strategy. And I think marketing ends up being a reaction rather than a plan. And there's no goals set. And they're just, you know, well, let's try doing this. Let's try doing this. Let's try doing this. But one of my favorite sayings is Zig Ziglar, if you aim at nothing, you're going to hit it every time. And that is 100%. I've lived my career by that sentence, right? Like that. It's so true. You have to have a goal. You have to have the bullseye, and so that you're not just shooting your arrows all over the place. And then you can come back, measure it, and see what worked and what didn't. And I see sometimes, like, it's so obvious to me when I sit down with a company and see where the hole is, right? They sit there and tell me what their problems are. And, you know, well, I have, you know, for example, I have a website and we're spending all this money for all these leads to come in. And this is one of my pet peeves, but they're a distributor or they're a manufacturer and they sell through distributors.
Sure. So
they bring all these leads in and they're paying all this money. And then the distributor is saying to them, we're getting all the leads for you. We're selling it for you. Why are you spending all this money? And then you look at their system, you see their process, and they're bringing people into their website. And then they have a dealer locator map with their dealer's email address and phone number. that's just a black hole, right? Where now the distributor can say, I brought those leads in. You just gave away all of the money that you were talking about. I hate, I sit down with a company and I see one of those distributor maps and I just want to rip it up out of the internet and tear it to shreds. You're just throwing away all your leads and you have no idea where they're going. That one drives me crazy. But I think that's a huge issue, especially with manufacturers.
Yeah. What are some of the other mistakes you're seeing? Because, a lot of people spend money on paid search or paid SEO, and they're not working on their organic, and they're paying a lot of money and bidding up prices for very competitive contended keywords in categories. Yeah. And then they're coming to a site and then they're just bouncing right off because there's nothing sticky to grab their email, right?
Yeah, that's it. There's no reward for once they get to your website, and your terms, like if it's Google AdWords, if your terms are too broad, you're paying for clicks for somebody who's never going to be your customer. Correct. So you need to really narrow down. I've worked with this one company recently that does this survey, that they pay all this money to put out this survey on Facebook. And it's more like, I won't give the details, but it's more like, like a personality about your animal, right? Well, people are just having fun. They're not actually your customer. It's too broad, right? It's just interest-based. Sure, you have 10,000 email addresses from it, but you paid for those 10,000 email addresses, and maybe 2% could possibly be your customer. So I think that a lot of them, they're like, we spent this much money on Facebook advertising. Yeah, but were you targeting the right people? Were you asking the right questions? Are you getting their information? So I think, and then, a manager looks at that data and goes, well, our closing ratio on these is like 0.3%. Well, of course it is, because you're targeting people who aren't your customer. So Correct. That's really, really important to understand when you're doing, especially pay-per-click too. But a lot of people are now ignoring the organic side too. You just brought that up too. And I think they think that you can just, pour a bunch of money into it and not have to be creative. And that's not true. You still have to be creative. You still have to have good content, and you still have to be showing up every day. Like, what's his name? Gary.
And Chuck.
Yep. That's it. Thank you. And, when somebody asks him, well, how much content should I be putting out? 1 a day? He says, no, 75 a day, right? Like, if it's your customer, if you're actually engaging, if you are putting out something that somebody wants, you can't have too much of that, right? So, 75 might be a bit of an exaggeration, but sure. I've met companies that say, well, we put out a newsletter once a month. Well, that's not enough, right?
Oh, I love it. I love it, Chrissy. I'm conscious of time. I want to squeeze the lemon here a little bit more. I talk often on the marketing side of the business around we need to be focusing on being sniper, not shotgun. And, you know about ideal client avatar and, ideal customer profile and all the sort of marketing acronyms. But, calling out that ideal client in your advertising is going to help you. And specificity spits cash is the other mantra that I've been taught. Newsletters, I had to jump in there because newsletters it's like a compliance exercise. Oh, we've got to get the newsletter out. Like, who's going to give me some content this month? I think newsletters can be brilliant or they can be terrible. And I think my guiding advice, and I'll be very interested in what you think, is a newsletter is only a good newsletter when it is newsworthy. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Yes, for sure. I usually say ditch the newsletter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you replace it with when you ditch it?
Well, in farming, that's pretty simple. You can, we have a pattern throughout the year. If you sell equipment and that equipment is used in January, or if that is used in spring, maintenance is always something. It has to be valuable though, something that they would want. Would you want to read it? Right? I go through and unsubscribe from my inbox all the time, but there's always those few that make the cut. right?
Yeah.
And often it's seasonal. And in agriculture, we are a seasonal industry. And so if you can go, okay, well, put yourself into the lead or the customer's shoes and say, what do they want to hear? What do they need right now? And how can we serve that? I think that's the answer to that. And ditch your newsletter, call it something else. I don't ever even open something that says newsletter because they just went around the office and said, who has something for me to put in this thing? It's silly.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I maybe we need to update our website, but I often see where they get through to our lead magnet and get an ebook and that pops up. And, it's 88 pages of goodness, right? It's the same thing that we talked about on your show. Mm-hmm. Email, another thing from COVID, we talked about trade shows, but like your email list is your lifeline.
Yes.
Like you've constantly got to be building your list. Yeah. And, we talk about lead magnets. And when we mean lead magnets, team, we mean, for those that don't know about it, it might be an ebook. It might be a cheat sheet. It might be a calculator. It might be a piece of high valuable content that is specific and relevant for your ideal customer that they want. Because honestly, Chrissy, the amount of times I've sat in rooms and go, farmers don't give me emails. I say utter crap.
Yep.
BS. Because we've got case study after case study, whether we're selling bulls or we're selling agri-tech or we're selling genetics, we got hundreds of emails from a populated Facebook form because the lead magnet, the ebook was so bloody good and they wanted it.
Yeah, for sure. And another good point in that kind of bucket is that in this world that we live in right now, there are a lot of activists trying to get rid of animal agriculture. Yeah. And so I find a lot that I get throttled. I get, depending on who my guest is, I've had, slaps from YouTube. I've had, right. You need a way to reach your customer and you need to think ahead because it's not going to get better. It's just going to get worse, especially if you're in animal agriculture. Yes. So for myself I sell content.
Yes.
What I always like to remind people is that if it's not on YouTube, if you're just going and watching my podcast on YouTube, I get YouTube taken down often, right? So I also have a backup on Rumble and I also have a backup here and here and here. But if you want the content regularly, subscribe. We have just under 10,000 subscribers. And then in that case, you're going to get the email and then you can just listen to it on whatever, we're on 25 different platforms, right? So then you just decide where you want to listen to it. Yeah. But so for your own company, you have to figure out where is that risk because agriculture is not popular with the world, right? There's only 2% of people that work. Well, there's 20% that work in agriculture, but 2% that are producers. So it's not like nobody's banging down your door in the tech space, right? And really we're being throttled. So you have to have a backup plan. So I think a company absolutely needs to have a good plan to be able to get these email addresses and then get the customer to understand why.
Chrissy, so good because the thing is, I see some companies cry when their Facebook business page gets down and they've done something completely innocent and very innocuous, but because it's becoming so woke, for better word, in terms of the animal activation, the point you made was getting throttled. The thing is, people forget that, we've got all these followers on Facebook. You don't own that data, but you own their email and then you build your list. And that's why your list is your lifeline. So when we were in COVID and when you were talking to your network, I was talking to mine saying your list is your lifeline. You need to be talking directly because a lot of my guys, they're selling for a reseller and they don't have that full line of sight through to their customer. They don't even know who the customer is. But if you've got an email and you've got a mobile, which is populated by a Facebook form, so a big farmer if he's a male with big thumbs, it's already pre-populated. Bang, you've got the information. Yeah. And we might ask what I call like an online drafting gate, like a couple of questions about farm size or herd size or flock size. It's all got, honestly, could talk for hours to you about this. What are some of the tools you recommend in the tech? We talked about, marketing automation and rural really getting up to play with it and the trade show guys getting up to play with it. What are some of the tools that you recommend that your go-to tools?
Yeah. So it depends on budget, of course, right? Any company you can fit the right tools to the budget. So there are a lot of tools. Some of my favorites though are Smartsheet. That one I've been using for a couple of years now, and I love it, love it, love it, love it. It's more of an integration tool. It's not standalone, but it integrates with MailChimp, with Constant Contact, with everything. And it's an excellent tool for automating your workflow. Excellent tool. So that's one that I highly recommend. Zapier is another one. It's just an integration tool by itself. It doesn't do anything, but it marries two different pieces of software so that you can connect different pieces of software. Right. And it's vast in what it can do. So I use both of those every single day. I love CRMs a lot. There's so much you can do. But my favorite is, it was SharpSpring. It was acquired by Constant Contact. So now it's called Constant Contact CRM. Yeah. And in my opinion, and I've done a YouTube video about this and about all of the different CRMs and what the pros and cons are. But the reason that one's my favorite is that it for the dollar value, it will do everything the other ones do, the higher price ones do. It just might not be quite as polished as those ones. So you can spend $10,000 a month, or you can spend $600 a month.
Are you talking about HubSpot, Chrissy?
HubSpot is one of the more expensive ones, right? Not quite the most expensive one, but the Constant Contact one is my favorite, just because it starts at $600 a month, right? There's not too many.
The thing is, often I see rural marketers as well. One more mistake I see from rural marketers is they chase the next shiny thing. Yes. Or we'll get another tool. And then this marketing tech stack just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's like the company that says, we need another product. And they have product proliferation or SKU proliferation. It's like, you've got too many products. So we know with Barry Schwartz, his wonderful TED talk around the paradox of choice. The more choice you give someone, the more overwhelming it is and the less likely they are to buy. So interesting around those tools. Last questions, because we'll love and leave you very shortly, is what do you think makes a great rural marketer? What are the traits and attributes when you are talking to your client base and you go, this man or woman, this person is really good and they understand marketing, they're highly effective. We've talked about them being open-minded, not resistant to change, putting business interest ahead of personal self-interest. What are the traits you look for in a rural marketer? You go, I can work this person, they're great, and they're going to get, most importantly, outcomes. They're not going to create outputs, and there's a big difference between those two, right? Yeah. A lot of marketers are really good at, hey, we did the strategy, we did the plan. It's actually the execution, and did that plan then deliver a result? What are the things, that specific traits and attributes that say to you and signal that person's a great rural marketer? They know what they're doing.
Hands down, it would be the heart of a servant. If they really want to help the people they're working with, it makes a huge difference. I've sat at dinners, you're out on the road and everybody gets together for dinner. And one salesperson, like some people, that would be a nightmare to sit with 12 salespeople at a dinner. But I've had hundreds of those dinners where we're sitting there and somebody says, well, this particular producer is having a hard time. This is the problem. And I don't know, does anybody know what we could do? And they sit around and nobody benefits, but they figure out the problem. And then one of those people can go back to that farmer and say, here's a possible solution for you. Right. And I think that's the way you build trust. And if you don't have trust, you can't sell anything, whether you're a salesperson or a marketer. You have to build that trust, and you have to understand what it is that customer needs, what would make their life easier, what would solve a problem for them, not just how can I make my bank account bigger, because everybody can sniff that out.
Yeah. I think taking the role on a servant and being subservient. I've got a provocative question. I always lie and say I've got only one more question, Chrissy, and then I squeeze in a few more because I really want to levels of value here. This is probably contentious potentially, and I mean it with a lot of respect and maturity, is there's often the cat and mouse game, Tom and Jerry. Well, you guys didn't give us good leads. This is a sales team to marketing, and they're at each other's throats, right? And I'm a big fan of centralized, not decentralized, for that very reason. but that role of not subservience, because that's too dismissive and devaluing of marketing as an expertise and a craft in itself. But do you think marketing should be a servant to sales? Do they see themselves supporting the front line and giving them the content and the insight that delivers into the pipeline of CRM a really qualified lead? Because the biggest complaint I hear from most rural sales teams that I hang out with now for most of my life now is that, marketing, they just give us really crap leads. They're unqualified. And, the statistics are there, like something crazy, like 70% of marketing material is not used by salespeople. Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's a huge question. If you wanted to end quick, that was not the right question to ask.
Yeah. Okay, so we're not.
So
give us your answer.
Yeah. So there's an author. So this is a problem in every single company, right? And there's an author, Mike Michalowicz, and I've read all of his books. He just actually
Profit First and Clockwork and all that things.
Clockwork,
yeah, they're behind me here.
Yeah. And I just
he's awesome.
I love his books. But what he teaches is there's the queen bee role in a company.
Yes.
And we have to all serve the queen bee role. Now, what you can see when you say, okay, here are the metrics I want from this department, this department, this department, and that becomes their goal. Now you have salespeople selling, and you have marketers bringing in leads, and you have the shipping department shipping things out.
Yeah.
But to take that, I've experienced this. This is why it kind of gives me like chills and memories and PTSD. But you go to the shipping department because a customer has just called you, and you're like, where's the product? And they say to you, I sent it back. I sent it back to you because we needed this question answered. But they didn't want it on their desk because when somebody comes to count the piles in the file, they're not serving the customer. They're not serving the queen bee role. They're serving their own metric. So that's why you've got to be so careful in a company to not have 12 different metrics and people serving these different metrics. And it's the same with sales and marketing. It's really easy to blame each other. The marketer doesn't understand the customer. I'm the one that has to talk to them. I'm the one that has to answer the phone.
I'm the one that makes the money. I'm the profit center. They're the cost center. They're the coloring in department. Paid by numbers. They're really good at spending money, and we just need some money to spend in the community. Yeah, I've heard it all.
Yes, exactly. Me too. I hear it every day. But it's about, so for the leadership in a company, they have to have a good process, again, where each of those people can identify a pain point and accelerate it and say, this is my pain point, and have a way. If somebody has a pain point over and over and over and over again, they're just going to limp, right? And they're never going to get better. They're just going to, if they can't take the shoe off and let it heal, they're just going to limp forever and not get better. So as a leadership, you have to say, okay, well, this is how we deal with pain points. I need to hear your pain point because then maybe we can solve it. And the oddest thing to me is that I work with companies and I say, keep a notebook, and every time you feel pain in your workday, write it down, bring it to me because we can probably solve it. And it's alarming how many people don't come to that meeting prepared with some pain points because they felt pain that week, right? But that's how you solve it. You got to take the shoe off and let it heal, right? So I think that falls on leadership to say, okay, if you have a problem, this is a space where you can come tell me what that problem is, and we're going to try to find a solution. It might not be the solution you want, but it's going to serve the queen bee role, not just.
Yeah. And what is the queen bee role? Is that the customer, or who is it?
So every company has to figure that out for themselves. Like for myself, I kind of have two different business models, right? But if I'm thinking about North American Ag, which is news and podcasts and media, the queen bee role is to make sure I have excellent content for producers and people in agribusiness, right? And so for me, producing that content, that's my queen bee role there.
Yes.
Because everything else comes from that, right? So all the email addresses I get after, all of the subscribers, all of the likes, all the impressions, that's a result. That's not the goal. That's a result from the queen bee role. Yeah. If it was a product, then it would be, they really have to decide for themselves, but it could be, we need a product that's out the door without a 10-week lead time.
Yeah.
Right? It could be specific like that, which has been a huge problem over the past few years is lead time, right? So that's why that one popped up in my head. But yeah, you sit down and it takes a bit to figure out for a company what that role is, because some goals can be goals, but they're not the thing that really serves your business.
I think when we have clarity of our roles, I think that's the important point.
Yeah.
It's like, marketing, it's not like there's a hierarchical difference between sales and marketing. They've both got craft, they've both got discipline and expertise. I think the best teams win when they're centralized, when marketing really are served by the sales team saying, these are the pain points and the problems and the antennae and the frontline intel. We need this type of content coming out. Marketers, often going, we can't get any case studies from the sales team. Well, sales team don't complain that the marketing material is not good enough or not specific enough if you're not giving them that frontline intel. So I don't want it to be a beat up between sales, which none of us are doing here, but there is understanding almost the queen bee role of each discipline. Marketing is there to deliver qualified leads. So sales teams can focus on selling and marketing can focus on marketing. But it's when everyone's flying around trying to do each other's role. Well, marketing aren't delivering leads, so I need to go and generate my leads and drive up more driveways. Absolutely. A lazy rural rep relies on marketing to generate their leads. Imagine the 10x difference or the 2x difference if you were generating leads and marketing generating leads. You'd be in the top 5% of all salespeople.
Absolutely.
Right? So Chrissy, I must take responsibility for running over. I think it's been time incredibly well spent. Thank you so much. Where can people find you? Where's the best place to go? We'll include the notes in the show notes.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, go to NorthAmericanAg.com if you're looking for content that's relevant to agriculture. And then ChrissyWozniak.com is my site that talks more about marketing. We also have, through North American Ag, we offer full service marketing as well. So you can find that, and I think it's in the About Us section. It's a drop down. Yeah. And I would love it if people subscribe to whatever podcast you listen to, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon, whatever. We're on all of them. So I love subscriptions. I love people sharing, and I love feedback. So if anybody has feedback, I love to hear it.
Awesome. Chrissy, you've been so generous, and all your socials will be in those links that we provide. Guys, we were so lucky to get you in 0.5 of the top podcasts worldwide for North American Ag. Chrissy, that is a real achievement. I'm so chuffed for you.
Thank you so much. And you
deserve it. You can fully deserve it.
Thank you so much. It was
awesome, Chrissy.
Very fun answering questions.
Awesome. And you asking questions of me. Awesome, Chrissy. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Hey you, hope you enjoyed that episode and you learnt lots from it. It takes a bit of work to get these wonderful guests onto the show who share their knowledge freely and generously. So it makes sense for me to ask you a tiny favour in return, and that is to ask you to rate, subscribe or share this podcast whenever you can with friends, family, colleagues or anyone in your network that you think might benefit from it. The reason for my request here is simple. It's because I'm on a mission, and that mission is to elevate and improve the world's perception of rural sales reps. I do that by sharing more effective sales and marketing strategies, by interviewing world-class leaders and thinkers on this show, so we can get you and them the leads, respect and results you all deserve. But I can only do that when you help me get this podcast out to a bigger, wider audience. As you know, unlike other podcasts, I don't include any of those annoying ads that affect your listening or learning experience. But if you did listen and you learned something, and you're interested in making more sales or generating more qualified leads on a predictable and reliable basis, make sure you grab a free copy of my How to Succeed in Rural Sales ebook. It's normally $19.95 on Amazon, but you can download it for free as a listener. You can join my weekly rural sales email list, or you can even find out more about our rural sales success team training or rural sales manager training programs, including an exclusive preview of the content and training material we cover in them. If you want any of these free tools and resources, go to www.ruralsalessuccess.com, which I've also included in the show notes of this episode, which you can click on. So thank you for sharing the show, and thank you for investing your time with me, because I know you have choices where you spend that time. I do hope the time you spent with me today here was time well spent. Appreciate it and appreciate you.